Daniel Carter is the CEO of Urban Roast, a renowned coffee chain known not only for its exceptional coffee but also for its strong commitment to equality and outstanding customer service. To Daniel, Urban Roast is more than just a business, it's a mission, ensuring that everyone, whether a customer or an employee, is treated with respect and fairness. However, recently, some disturbing reports began to surface. Complaints about rude and discriminatory behavior at one particular Urban Roast location caught Daniel's attention. Some customers claimed they were treated poorly, while others alleged that a specific employee displayed clear racial bias. Daniel couldn't ignore these accusations, but instead of relying solely on reports, he decided to see the truth for himself. One late evening, Daniel left the company headquarters, trading his tailored suit for a simple hoodie and jeans. No longer the powerful CEO, tonight he was just another customer walking into an Urban Roast cafe under an unfamiliar name. It was the only way to find out if his employees truly upheld the company's values. As he pushed open the door, he immediately sensed something was off. The atmosphere wasn't welcoming. Instead, there was a chill in the air, an unsettling feeling creeping through the space. And at that moment, Daniel knew he was about to witness an uncomfortable truth. As soon as Daniel stepped into the cafe, he immediately sensed that something was off. The atmosphere felt heavy, far from the warm and welcoming vibe that Urban Roast was known for. The overhead lights flickered slightly, and a group of employees stood behind the counter, chatting among themselves instead of serving customers. A long line had formed, yet none of the staff seemed to be in any hurry. Daniel observed closely. A blonde woman stood behind the counter, her name glinting on the tag pinned to her uniform, Samantha. While some employees were working, she was leaning against the counter, eyes glued to her phone, completely ignoring the waiting customers. Taking a deep breath, Daniel stepped forward with a friendly smile. "Excuse me, may I place an order?" he asked politely. Samantha didn't bother looking up. She let out a loud sigh, swiping on her phone as if he had just interrupted something important. Then, in a tone laced with annoyance, she muttered, "Wait like everyone else. Can't you see I'm busy?" Daniel froze for a moment. Busy? Busy doing what? Scrolling on her phone? He stepped back into the line, deciding to observe more before reacting. Within minutes, Daniel noticed a troubling pattern. Whenever a white customer approached, Samantha's demeanor changed. She smiled, greeted them warmly, and prepared their orders promptly. But when a customer of color stepped up, her attitude turned cold and dismissive. She barely acknowledged them, rushed through their orders, and never once cracked a smile. The tension in the room grew thicker. The customers who had been brushed aside started to realize the discrimination, but no one dared to speak up. Some exchanged glances, shook their heads in disappointment, and quietly left. Daniel clenched his fists, forcing himself to remain calm. He couldn't believe this was how his employees were treating people. Urban Roast was built on the foundation of fairness and respect, yet right in front of him, blatant discrimination was unfolding. It was time to test Samantha again. Daniel stepped forward once more. "I'd like a medium latte, please." Samantha still didn't look up. She lazily swiped her screen before shrugging. "We're out." Daniel narrowed his eyes. He had just watched her make the exact same drink for another customer moments earlier. "Are you sure?" His voice remained calm, but there was now an unmistakable firmness to it. This time, Samantha lifted her head and locked eyes with him. A smirk curled on her lips. "I said we're out. If you don't like it, try another store." A cold wave of anger surged through Daniel. She wasn't just rude, she was deliberately discriminating. There was no doubt about it now. Samantha wasn't just an unprofessional employee, she was a toxic presence, and her behavior was intentional. A chilling realization crept into Daniel's mind. This wasn't just about poor service, there was something far more sinister happening here. A dangerous attitude, a toxic culture, was taking root in this location. Not wanting to cause a scene just yet, Daniel gave a small nod and silently walked out. But in his mind, the decision was already made. This would not go ignored. As he neared the exit, he glanced back. A young barista behind the counter, Ryan, was stealing nervous glances in his direction. He looked as if he wanted to say something, but the moment Samantha turned around, he quickly lowered his head, avoiding her gaze. Daniel recognized that look immediately: fear. And if an employee was scared, it meant that Samantha wasn't just mistreating customers. She was likely intimidating her coworkers too. This wasn't just a customer service issue. This was a moral issue. Daniel strode toward his car, his jaw set. The anger inside him wasn't reckless. It was the fury of a leader watching his company's values being trampled. And he knew this was just the beginning. Daniel sat in his office, his eyes fixed on the computer screen. Dozens of customer feedback reports from the Urban Roast branch he had visited earlier filled the screen. The words cut deep, like sharp knives carving into his mind. The staff here is discriminatory. I felt unwelcome. A female employee was extremely disrespectful to customers of color. Daniel clenched his fist around the mouse. The truth was undeniable. Samantha hadn't just been rude to him. She had been treating customers this way for a long time. And the most chilling part? No one had stepped in to stop it. Leaning back in his chair, he closed his eyes for a moment. He had once taken great pride in the company culture he built, in the values Urban Roast stood for: fairness, respect, and zero tolerance for discrimination. But right under his nose, a disease had spread through his system without his knowledge. But now he knew. And he would not let it continue. The plan to expose the truth. Daniel decided to return to the store, but this time, he wouldn't go alone. He gathered a small team: regional directors, HR executives, and a legal advisor. They needed to witness firsthand what he had experienced. One late afternoon, Daniel and his team walked into the cafe. He was no longer the man in a simple hoodie. This time, he wore a sharp suit, his face unreadable but filled with authority. Inside, the cafe was in full swing. Customers waited patiently, baristas worked at a sluggish pace. And there was Samantha, standing lazily behind the counter, phone in hand, just like before. Daniel took a deep breath. Gather the entire staff, he instructed the store manager. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. Employees glanced at one another, sensing something was off. Some understood what was happening. Others just felt the tension. But all of them put down what they were doing and gathered in the seating area. Samantha, as usual, took her time. She barely acknowledged Daniel at first, a flicker of defiance in her eyes. But when she noticed the people accompanying him, her face went pale. Daniel stepped forward, his gaze sweeping across the room before locking onto Samantha. Last week I came to this store. Not dressed like this. Not as the CEO. Just as a regular customer. The air in the room grew heavy. Samantha swallowed hard. I stood in line, waiting like everyone else. Daniel continued, his tone calm but razor-sharp. And I was ignored. Dismissed. Treated with disrespect. And I wasn't the only one. A murmur spread through the employees. Some lowered their heads, avoiding his gaze. Daniel lifted a stack of papers. Customer complaints. I've reviewed them all. The same issue. The same person responsible. He paused before saying deliberately, Samantha, do you have anything to say? Samantha stammered. I didn't know it was you. I didn't mean. Daniel raised a hand, silencing her. That doesn't matter. What matters is that every customer, no matter who they are, deserves respect. And you failed to give them that? The silence in the room was suffocating. Samantha looked down, her usual confidence shattered. Daniel turned to the entire staff. I didn't come here just to fire one person. I came here to fix a system. He then looked at Jessica, the store manager, who had been sitting quietly. Jessica, you saw what was happening. But you did nothing. Why? Jessica bit her lip. I was afraid of making things worse. Samantha has influence over some of the staff. I didn't want to cause tension. Daniel nodded, but his gaze was piercing. Silence is complicity. If we allow injustice to happen, we are just as guilty as the one committing it. He turned back to the staff. Starting today, every Urban Roast employee will undergo mandatory diversity and inclusion training. We will not let this happen again. Then he looked directly at Samantha. As for you, he took a deep breath. You are no longer employed at Urban Roast. Effective immediately, Samantha's mouth fell open, but no one spoke up for her. Some employees even looked relieved, as if a weight had been lifted. As Samantha walked out in silence, Daniel scanned the room. "We will do better. Starting now." The employees looked at him with newfound respect. Ryan, the young barista Daniel had noticed before, gave him a small nod. Daniel knew this wasn't the end, it was a new beginning. And he would do whatever it took to ensure Urban Roast's values were never forgotten. A new beginning, rebuilding trust. The heavy tension from the meeting had dissipated, but the weight of the past still lingered in the air. As Daniel left the Urban Roast branch, he could feel the unease in his employees' eyes. Some were shaken. Others were relieved. But all of them had witnessed something they would never forget. Back in his office, Daniel knew his job was far from over. Firing Samantha was just one step. If he truly wanted to change the company, he had to heal the wounds that had been left behind and make sure this never happened again. He turned to his team, his voice firm yet composed. "We are not just removing a problem, we are rebuilding a culture. From this day forward, Urban Roast must be a place where every single customer and employee feels valued." Implementing change. The next morning, Daniel sent a company-wide announcement. A new initiative was being launched across all Urban Roast locations, the Inclusion Commitment. This wasn't just about policies and rules. It was about accountability. Every store would undergo mandatory training on inclusivity, respect, and ethical service. Secret shoppers would be sent to observe customer interactions. Employees would be encouraged to report discrimination without fear of retaliation. Most importantly, Daniel implemented a customer experience council made up of employees from different backgrounds. Their job? To ensure that every store upheld the values of equality and respect. But there was one more thing Daniel knew he had to do: return to the very branch where it all started. Facing the team again. A week after the confrontation, Daniel walked back into the Urban Roast location. This time, the energy felt different. The tension was still there, but there was something else. A sense of curiosity, of anticipation. Jessica, the store manager, stood near the counter, looking more confident than before. As soon as she spotted Daniel, she straightened her posture and approached him. "Mr. Collins, I just want to say, I understand now," she said, her voice steady. "I should have spoken up earlier. I won't make that mistake again." Daniel gave a small nod. "Good. Because leadership isn't about avoiding conflict. It's about making the right decisions, even when they're hard." Jessica nodded, determination in her eyes. She wasn't the same hesitant manager from before. As they spoke, Ryan, the young barista, walked up nervously. "Mr. Collins, can I talk to you for a second?" Daniel turned to him, surprised. "Of course." Ryan hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I wanted to say, thank you. For standing up for us. For showing that people like me matter." Daniel felt a lump in his throat. This was why he had done it. This was what truly mattered. Earning back the trust of the community. Word of the changes at Urban Roast spread fast. Customers who had once felt unwelcome slowly started to return. One afternoon, an elderly black woman stepped inside, her eyes scanning the cafe cautiously. Daniel, who happened to be present, watched as Ryan greeted her with a warm smile. "Good afternoon, ma'am. What can I get for you today?" he said, his tone filled with genuine kindness. The woman hesitated before speaking. "I used to come here, but I stopped." Ryan nodded in understanding. "Well, I hope today we can change that." She smiled and placed her order. Daniel watched the exchange with quiet pride. This was the beginning of something new. Something better. The lesson that lasts. A month later, Daniel stood before a group of new hires at Urban Roast's corporate office. He didn't give them a business strategy. He didn't talk about profits. Instead, he told them the story of what had happened. He told them about the day he walked into one of his own stores and saw the ugly truth firsthand. He told them about the hard decisions he had to make, about the pain of realizing that discrimination had existed within the company he built. But most importantly, he told them about the change that followed. About how a single moment of courage, honesty, and accountability had reshaped an entire company. Being a part of Urban Roast isn't just about serving coffee, he said, his gaze locking onto each employee. It's about serving people. And here, every person matters. A silence filled the room. But it wasn't the silence of fear. It was the silence of understanding, of purpose. As Daniel stepped down from the podium, he knew that this was more than just a company policy. It was a legacy. A promise that would live on. And this time, it would not be broken. Rebuilding a legacy, the ripple effect of change. After the difficult but necessary decision, Daniel knew that change couldn't stop with meetings and policies. He needed to create a lasting impact, a true transformation from within. So, Daniel decided not only to implement administrative measures, but he wanted to restore the community's trust in Urban Roast, and most importantly, rebuild the trust within his own team. Every morning, as the baristas began their shifts, they weren't just learning how to make perfect cups of coffee, they were also learning how to treat every customer with respect and fairness. Continuous diversity and inclusion training sessions were held, with real-life scenarios helping employees understand the power of empathy and patience. These sessions didn't just change how they worked, but also how they viewed themselves and their customers. The surrounding community also began to notice the change. Customers who had once felt mistreated returned, realizing that Urban Roast had truly transformed. Daniel wasn't just rebuilding a brand, he was restoring a deep trust in fairness and kindness. Small but consistent actions gradually shaped a strong company culture, and Urban Roast became not just a coffee chain, but a symbol of positive change in the community.